Well, Ted, thank you so much for joining me today.
It is so nice to see you again,
I
Arlene.
know our first episode, I was like, "Will you come back?" Because you were telling me you're writing about this workbook. We're going to be talking about the recovery movie meetups workbook based off of your book, Addicted in Film. Is that? Do I have the
Yeah,
whole title? There's a tagline in there.
absolutely. Yeah, and
Okay.
and and it's not just a workbook. It's sort of blossomed into a whole program that's running across the country. It's been crazy. This whole story is it's just amazing. It's just one of those things where very few times in your life do things just fall into place the way that they need to, and you wish that they would. And doing something that's helping people. So I'm delighted. And thank you so much for having me to talk to
Oh,
your audience about it, because it's kind of cool. And it's something
this
that your audience can get involved in as well.
Yeah, and this is the thing, people in recovery, we love to have fun and get together and do things. But early in recovery, sometimes you have a surplus of time on your hands because the time that you know what I mean? Like the time that you spent drinking or doing other things. Now you're abstinent and sober and maybe going to meetings or whatever you're doing. But there's a lot of free time. And so movies, who doesn't love the movies, right? So tell me, let's recap a little bit about what your driver was for writing your first book, Addicted in Film. And let's just kind of go from there and talk about, I would love to hear the story about how this new workbook came about.
Well, as I said in our last encounter, I was working in the film industry for many years, and pretty successful, and working for two major studios, and I had expense accounts and first class travel, and I was expected to wine and dine people and clients and movie stars, and I was just like in that group of people that were always having a great time. And I kept it together, and I drank a lot with everybody, all my clients. It was like, especially in Asia, like Japan, crazy, wow, Korea, oh my God, China, and you wonder how anything gets done. But and that was just part of the culture, and it still is for a lot of people in the film industry. It's a really important part, is the wining and the dining. And I wouldn't say that it got out of hand during my career, but when I left the studio system and I was out on my own as a screenwriter, there were moments of, like, there were lulls in my career, there were highs, there were lows, and there were middles. And I started to realize that I used alcohol to sort of medicate through time, through lapses in time, when frustration over like how long things were taking. When I'd get a script assignment and get paid a boatload of money, I would absolutely not drink and do the work, deliver it, and then wait around like, all right, well, what am I going to do now? Well, so I got into like just day drinking, which turned into, how it goes. And then
I
I
do.
realized, and then I realized, this is nonsense. So I stopped. I went to Smart Recovery meetings. I went to AA meetings. I read every book that I could get my hands on. And I also thought, well, I'm a movie guy. Well, let's watch some. I know there's some movies out there about addiction that might be interesting. So I set myself like a challenge. I'm going to watch 100 movies about addiction and recovery in 100 days. So I got my Apple TV and my Diet Coke and my microwave popcorn, and I just went to it. And I found some great films, and I found so many cool things in these films that were helpful to me, that I figured I wanted to share that with people to see, what they thought. So I came up with the book Addicted in Film, Movies We Love About the Habits We Hate. And I got some really like great reviews. I was kind of like nervous, fingers crossed. I'd never written a book before. I mean, I've written tons of screenplays and my movies have come out, and it's always been like, okay, critics say what critics say, but I'd never been based evaluated or critiqued on the basis of my story and how I'm portraying pretty complex ideas in the recovery and addiction space. So like, who am I to write this book? So I was like bracing for impact, but everything was super positive. Everybody really enjoyed it, and I enjoyed writing it. And then that blossomed into recovery movie meetups, where people started emailing me and said, hey, listen, we'd love to like do these meetings where we kind of like use your book, and can you give us a discount on your book so that people can read it and do it like a movie club about addiction and recovery? And I was like, well, that sounds like a great idea. I really kind of wanted to see if we could start like meetings around this. And so we started a meeting in a drug court in Saskatchewan, Canada, of all places. Don't ask me why there. But I sent out some questionnaires of like motivational interviewing questionnaires, like, and they started watching movies, and the response was like just terrific. Like, wow, these people are, their minds are blown. They're not going to go back to drinking. It's really changed them. They thought that watching The Lost Weekend changed their lives. You know, other people are saying that they're not going to try heroin ever again. So I thought, wow, so it has a therapeutic benefit. So I put together the Recovery Movie Meetups workbook, which is basically 20 movies about addiction and recovery, and a sort of a way to sort of figure out like why this movie is important to the overall conversation, a little bit of like why it's important, a little bit of the plot of the film, some movie trivia, like my insider look at some of the cool stuff behind the scenes, which I was involved with. And I was tangentially involved in some way, shape, or form with some of these movies, which is kind of funny. So there's a funny story there. And then key characters, and then also, you know, issues that people should think about when they watch the film. So, and then some really great questionnaires. And so that turned into something really cool in the sense that we started to set up these meetings in recovery community organizations and treatment facilities. And lo and behold, it started to catch on. And so it turned into a program with training, with background support, book sales, and you know, webinars, and it's sort of proliferated into something that could be deployed on a national and international level. So CBS News did a whole segment about us. It was crazy. So things have gone really well. But you know, the thing that really strikes me the most is it's my initial suspicion that movies could be highly therapeutic in the right context with the right preparation has proven to be true. So I'm delighted that these are up and running, and it's helping people, and people are telling me that it's helpful, which is great.
There's something so amazing about storytelling. You know, you go to meetings like you were saying, Smart Recovery or whatever, where people are getting up and sharing their stories. What do you think it is about storytelling that is so can reach people? What is it about it that's so impactful?
Well, that's a great question. You know, I've always said that people underestimate movies, and they underestimate visual storytelling. You know, we are a very as a species, we're storytellers. So, you know, back when we're sitting around a cave, sitting around a fire in a cave, people were like, you know, drawing on caves. They were doing representations of real life. They were telling stories. And when you tell a story, you're asking people to sort of imagine what's going on in the story. And so that takes on the dimension of mental modeling in our advanced brains. So movies and stories are wonderful reflections of what life really is, or what we wish life were. And it's also very good to see what life shouldn't be like if you see it in proper context. So films have always had the power to move us emotionally. You know, addiction and recovery, you know, addiction is treated in very therapeutic settings as a very logical, rational argument. Like, you know, let's do a cost benefit analysis. Let's talk about how alcohol has hurt you. That's all very useful. But, you know, when you see visual representations of that, you see an objective representation of something, and then that allows that to inform your subjective experience of addiction. And then it also affects your critical self-evaluation, and it affects the decisions that you want to make going forward. And also, I also remind people that the process of recovery is just like any epic heroic story, which is the foundation, archetypal foundation of stories. It is the meta story. You've got a protagonist who's a very reluctant hero who has a problem, his or her addiction, who has problems with their self-doubt, their demons. They fight against their own problem, or their Darth Vader, which is, of course, their inner issues with addiction and recovery, or their lack of self-esteem, or past trauma, or whatever that is. And then they wage battle against that problem in the form of going up against Darth Vader to blow up the Death Star. And yeah, I know that sounds like maybe a little bit simple, but actually it's rather profound when you think about it, that all recovery really, to me, is a heroic struggle against our natural impulses and against our worst demons. But it's very easy to overcome if we go through the necessary steps of honesty, self-reflection, and being genuinely genuine with ourselves. And that's what rehab and other treatment modalities are actually trying to coax out of you when you go through this. It's just to be honest self-reflection, an appraisal of what the risks are, the issues and the problems and the errors that you're committing, and how you're living your life if drugs and alcohol are messing up your life. And it gives you a clear path towards that heroic third act resurrection, where you blow up the Death Star and everybody lives happily ever after.
My favorite movie reference ever. Star Wars.
Yeah.
Speaking of favorite movies, you list 20. I'm glad that you kind of narrowed it down to a focus, because they're in your, original book, there's many movies, 100. That's a lot. So how did you come to pick these 20?
Well, actually, with the help of our advisory committee, which are all sort of professionals in the addiction recovery space, and also I looked to see which movies were the most popular, had been most seen.
Okay.
But I also wanted to look for movies that had not been seen, or perhaps not, a little bit under the radar, that perhaps had been lost because they weren't widely released or poorly distributed, but were still important in the pantheon of films about addiction and recovery that I thought would be useful. And one of my selection criteria was that I didn't want to put movies that were just gratuitously using and abusing, and there are certain movies
Pineapple Express.
No Pineapple Express. I didn't want to glorify drug and alcohol use. I wanted to show movies where there were clear consequences that were negative and results that were honest. And I also wanted to put films that sort of covered the broad spectrum of issues that come up in recovery and different drugs of choice. So there's certain movies that are very alcohol centric, like Lost Weekend. There's others that are very methamphetamine centric, like Beautiful Boy. There's other ones that are very opioid centric, like 4 Good Days. Some movies are very much about the struggle of families and people who are addicted, and those issues, and seen from the perspective of somebody who's struggling with somebody else's addiction. Those movies are important too. So it doesn't have to just be movies about the addicted individual, but maybe, movies like Beautiful Boy, 4 Good Days, Days of Wine and Roses, where you have, or When a Man Loves a Woman, movies about people dealing with other people with addiction, and how that's also a struggle as well. Because addiction is not just your isolated issue. It's a whole thing with your whole connected community, friends, family, and the universe as a whole in a great respect. So when you make that transition to making better choices and heal, the entire world is healed as well. And it's almost like that line from Schindler's List, or that Hebrew proverb, like, he who heals himself heals the world. Mm-hmm. So I see that as very true in many respects. So because causality makes good things flow from good decisions at any moment in time. And so a lot of the movies sort of reflect that from and also moral questions of flight. Some people think that, being slightly buzzed is okay, and that you do things better. Well, then let's take a look at that in the case of the movie Flight, or this wonderful film like Another Round, which was a Danish film that won the Oscar for Best Picture, where these 3 buddies, or maybe they're 4 buddies, go on this experiment where they follow the guidelines of some obscure Danish scientist who thinks that maximum human productivity and emotional connection with the world is achieved after 3 drinks and a blood alcohol of 0.505%, but no more than that. So, if you can maintain that all day long, your life's going to be amazingly better. And these guys try that, and for a while, it does seem to be better. But, and there's the but, we all know where that ends, because that's the nature of addictions. Like you can never have enough of a good thing, or as much or as long of a good thing, etc. So, and then I guess that informs, an overall conversation about how much is too much, and can we moderate, can't we not, and everybody's different, obviously. So these movies, I think, cover a large swath of questions, issues, dynamics in the recovery and addiction story. And let's not forget, the addiction and recovery story is a story. It's informed from multiple points of view: historical, cultural, social, racial, anthropologically, psychologically, psychiatrically. and philosophically as well. And I try to cover all those bases the best I can, because certain people see their addiction and recovery from the lens of one thing. But if they open up their spectrum of thought to think that, well, my addiction is not specific to me, a lot of other people have this problem. It's not just that I'm a screw up, some people see themselves, but this is part of like what's going on biologically with me. This is what's going on with me philosophically, because like many people in our age today, we have perhaps a lack of connection or a lack of meaning, or the fact that we're trying to find meaning when we should try to be creating meaning. You know, those are all philosophically dense issues that I think movies allow us to very comfortably discuss those issues without pounding people over the head and saying, you really need to look at the philosophy behind your addiction. Well, no, take it easy, watch the movie, and let's discuss it openly and have you come up with those ideas that you glean out of the material, as opposed to people like doctrinaire telling you what you should be thinking or what you should be thinking about. And that's why I think movies are effective, because you get what you need out of those movies, as opposed to a therapist telling you what you need to get out of those movies.
I think one of the things you mentioned, you said it earlier about an objective perspective. It's so much easier to be objective about somebody else's experience because you're not emotional, you have no emotional attachments, right? Like it's very difficult for us to self-evaluate sometimes when we are hobbled with things like denial or defensiveness, which is really just a cover of, something underneath that is very fragile, that we, are vulnerable, we are injured or wounded, and we come up with these defenses. That's what really drugs and alcohol is about a lot of times, is about self-medicating from pain. And so it's very difficult sometimes, especially at the very beginning, to be objective about your own perspective. It's sort of like that idea that you can't read the label from inside the jar, right?
Yes.
But movies are so magical because we can watch somebody in their environment, and almost like, like the narration or the setup of the story, you're almost getting into their head. So you can kind of see how they're behaving and think what and understand what they're thinking. At the same time, you don't have those ego or defensiveness or any of that other stuff that's
Right.
blocking the lesson. And so it's easier to be objective and then maybe sort of at the side door apply it to your life.
Yeah, no, that's a great observation. And in the training that I've developed, I also use movies as ways to make a point about things. So, for instance, a lot of people saw the movie Inception. Great movie, sci-fi, like cool special effects,
Loved
Leonardo
it.
DiCaprio, super smart, whatever,
Yeah.
Christopher Nolan, love it, great. But at the core of that film is an idea which is very profound. And because you touched upon it, the fact that when people are in the throes of addiction, they are living in this false matrix-like reality
Yeah.
of self-absorption, and it's okay, and I'm special, I'm going to get away with it, I don't have a problem, it's they that have a problem, that cop shouldn't have pulled me over for the DUI, my family just doesn't get it, this is not bad at all, I can change this. So, and this is all defended by the ego, and the ego is this very carefully guarded and constructed edifice that's part of the mental modeling that's gone into your life up to that point. And so in Inception, the idea is that people can go into your mind and try to change one core idea in your mind, and thus affect the future course of your life. So I asked the thought experiment, if you could have like Leonardo DiCaprio go into your brain, into your dreams, and somehow plant in you the idea that you are not going to be an addicted individual for the rest of your life, and that you are causing damage, and that you need to do something about it, and that you will do something about it. You've decided to change. Remember, going through treatment, everything is a profound moment of changing your mind. And your mind is your ego. Changing your ego is not easy. The ego does not like to be changed. Nobody does. And so the ability to go in that mind and make that change, when you wake up, magically, you somehow say, you know what, I'm going to go to treatment. That's it. I'm done. That's great. Now, that would be a great outcome if that were a plausible outcome, but it's not, because it's a science fiction film. But think about what treatment really is, or think about what recovery is. It's all sorts of ways for people, thoughts, books, ideas, movies, maybe, to sort of start pummeling against your ego. Maybe even psychedelics in some contexts. But
Yeah.
all of this treatment is sort of trying to pick away at your ego so that you can finally release, have what some people call the ego death, and then see things for what they are, which is, you're an addicted individual, you're screwing up, you might die, you're hurting people, you're risking everything. What are you going to do? And in that moment of clarity, and it comes in different forms for different people. Sometimes it's spiritual awakening. Sometimes it's interventions after years of psychotherapy. Sometimes it's, going on a hike with a friend, or, maybe it's sometimes getting a DUI, or, unfortunately, sometimes it's hitting rock bottom where that realization manifests. But whatever it is, it's a fundamental change in your psyche, in your ego. And movies, when they reflect that, and using movies as a way to penetrate the ego and have people identify with what's going on in a film, it's sort of like a backdoor way to get into your psyche, and it's highly effective. And I think that's why recovery movie meetups, while on the surface it's like, oh, you're going to watch movies about addiction and recovery, that's great, but there's like a side door thing that's going on in people's brains that they don't really recognize. I'll give you an example. Like, for instance, changing your mind about addictive behavior is a profound change in a person. That's, you wake up in the morning, you think you know what's real, you think you know who you are, and yet, no. Addiction recovery, recovery tells you you need to throw everything out, start all over again, recreate your life, recreate who you are, what you want, where you're going, etc. Scary. Everybody knows that. That's why everybody is very conservative. They go backwards. They say, no, I don't want to. But they know that they have to. They have to change their mind. It's like the metaphor of the cave that I used, which was beautifully reflected in the movie The Whale with Brendan Fraser.
Oh,
you are in decision. You have to change, but you just don't want to do it right now. So you're sitting in a cave and the fire's going out, you're running out of food, and you know it, but you procrastinate, and you have to decide to decide. It's like Neo in the Matrix. Are you going to take the red pill? You take the blue pill. So, but either way, you have to take a pill because life forces those decisions upon you. And so when you finally do, then, everything changes and you can go on with your life. But making that change in that moment is fundamentally difficult. And it seems impossible to certain people. But when you see other people do it in films, and you realize that it can be done, and people have done it all the time, and you see inspirational outcomes, and you see the problems associated that you have encountered reflected in the stories of the people that you see on these movies, that level of self-identification is very powerful. And it also gives people sort of like a sense of psychic relief, because another example of this is, for instance, visual storytelling can profoundly change people's minds. Like, I wish I could share this slide. Maybe I could. If you want me to share,
sure.
do you do?
Yeah.
Okay, let me share this.
People on the podcast won't be able to see it, but I'll just plug the YouTube channel for a second and say that you should be watching the YouTube channel.
Can you see that? I mean, is that?
I can. Yeah.
Okay. So, yeah. So, addiction is, like you said, it's part of a mental model, a subjective experience, and mental modeling are our thoughts. Addiction is our thought patterns, but then we act out in the objective world. And so recovery really is remodeling, in a sense. And that's why I talk about inception. You're sort of trying to break into a safe. And, what can you do? Well, imagery, reason, science, pain, fear, there's all these motivators that can change people. But this is what really, I think, affects people: powerful imagery. World problems are tedious and they're subjective ideas. They're out there, but they are until they take on a sudden immediacy as tragic objective realities. So when we see things and people suffering or dealing with the same things that we're dealing with, et cetera, like in these cases, the riots, the racial riots, and hosing down marchers in Selma, Alabama, or the napalm girl, or the poor polar bear, that brought into public consciousness, the racial segregation, the war in Vietnam, and global warming. And suddenly millions of people's lives and opinions were suddenly changed overnight. So visually, the visuals are really what matters.
Yeah, the whole idea of the picture says 1,000 words.
The picture tells 1,000 words. And that's what using videos, using movies in therapy meetings is based on that, a single image of somebody in one of these movies could have, like Inception, profound impact on a person's sense of self and affect the decisions that they make from that moment forward. That could be the aha moment. And I tell people as part of this program, what I'm selling is aha moments.
That's so brilliant. Yeah, you were talking about changing your mind. It's like we all have these beliefs that most of them are not even our own. Like when you're growing up as a child, you inherit your parents' beliefs. And a belief is interesting because it's just an idea that's repeated over and over again until it's taken as the truth, right? And that goes into your subconscious mind. And as you're talking about all this stuff, I was like, psychedelics. I practice hypnosis. That's one way of sort of accessing the subconscious mind and changing those beliefs. But this is such an elegant, simple way, watching movies and then asking. I want to talk about the workbook a little bit because it's such a great way to talk about changing minds, because we don't really realize it, but we're all being brainwashed all the time, right? We're constantly bombarded by messages. So my position has always been to let's take control of that brainwashing, right? Like, and you're saying these movies are a way of, brainwashing has such a negative connotation to it. But when I first got sober, I was like, someone told me I was being brainwashed. And I was like, my brain needs some washing. So I'm.
And also, I would also add to that. Not only are we being brainwashed, we are brainwashing ourselves.
Yes, all the time, because we choose, and this is what drives me crazy, like some people watch like these crazy news channels that are just putting out all this fear mongering. And it's like, you're choosing to brainwash yourself, because our brain is like a biofeedback computer. Like whatever you put in, that's what comes out. And so I think the news is like a terrible way to spend your attention units. It's much better. I like the idea of choosing something like a movie. I love your explanation of Inception, because it does, speak to that core fundamental idea of a singular belief reframed can change the entire trajectory of your life.
Mm-hmm.
I
And
love
with
that idea.
the caveat being, they make it seem like it was your idea. And that's where traditional recovery can seem to falter sometimes, is that if they implant this idea that you need to recover and they're telling you, you're like, okay, sure, I get it. But if it suddenly becomes your idea to get better, then you're going to stick with it.
That's
And
the
that's
ticket.
the thing. Most people are phoning it in a lot of times. They come out of rehab and they're like, yeah, got it, great. But they still haven't really gotten it, because the idea wasn't theirs. They were forced into rehab.
And it takes a long time to sort of reprogram your mind.
Yes.
And let go. Whenever we let go of an idea like I'm not good enough, right? Or I'm not smart enough, or, you talked about self-identification. I feel like the beginning part of recovery a lot is about changing how we reframing how we see ourselves. I used to be the party girl, then I got sober and I was like, well, who am I now? And so,
Exactly.
and I feel like the movies, correct me if I'm wrong, or maybe you can think of an example, people are needing to replace who I used to be with who am I now.
Mm-hmm.
Are there movies that you can think of offhand that are like they used to be like this, and then this thing happened, and then they're living examples of a healthy life?
Oh yeah, absolutely. There's two very good ones, but one that is the most popular film about alcohol misuse or drugs or rehab ever made is 28 Days with Sandra Bullock. Everybody loves that movie, and it's entertaining and fun, but there's a very dense, very important story and message in that film. But at the end of the film, I don't want to ruin the movie for everybody, but I will. But
she gets sober.
Everybody's seen it.
Spoiler alert.
She gets better. But the thing is, like, so here's this party girl. She's been great. She's in this relationship, parties, going to cocktails, great, having a great time, whatever. Okay, whatever. She gets into rehab. she's phoning it in. She doesn't think she needs to be there. She doesn't talk up at group. Her boyfriend comes and slips her some Vicodins, etc. And so she's kind of like, she's got the idea that she needs to be there and she's forced to be there because of a plea deal, but she's not really there. But then over time, she learns that, yeah, I do belong here. I'm not special. Nobody's special. I get it now. So when she comes out, there's a scene that I think anybody in recovery will understand, which is that she goes back and she gets dropped off right there in her neighborhood with all the flashy neon lights of all the cocktail bars and dance clubs and corner pub, all those places where she had so much fun with her alcohol use disorder with her boyfriend. And her boyfriend's there. He's suave and good looking and like, come on, let's go out with this group of friends, etc. Let's have a great time. Now that you're out of purgatory, we can go back to the life that was so wonderful for us. And you can just see on her, you're like, no, don't do it, Sandra, don't do it, don't. And she doesn't. But yet in that moment, you see that there's like a loneliness, a longing, a sort of sense of like detachment and like, well, what do I do now? Yeah. And so she, months later, she goes and she's buying a plant. And one of her friends from, rehab, the funny guy, Gerhardt, whatever, who's the funny guy, comes in and he's buying a plant. And she's like, yes, you should buy a plant because maybe having a dog is not the right thing for you right now, but a plant, you can't really kill a cat. Well, I guess you can kill a plant, but
I can attest to that.
Yes, exactly. So it says that like, just baby steps, you have to restart your life, but that's the fun part is starting your life anew with new habits, new things, new opportunities, and new definitions of self. That's the real work of living, because most people assume, and I know this from personal experience because I had to move to a different country every 2 years. My father was in the foreign service. I've reinvented my career at least 8 times. And I'm used to it. I'm comfortable doing that. Scary, but I do it. But other people think that they are who they are and that's who they are. And they're set when the moment they graduate from college and get their first job and get married, that's that. But, life is, you've got to fill 90 plus years of living and a lot of stuff can happen and things can change on a dime. And so, the courage that it takes to reinvent yourself after recovery, after going through rehab, as daunting as it is also one of the most pleasurable long-term life growing experiences that you need to go through, I think, to say that you've had a fulfilling, complete life, because it allows you to re-examine yourself continually and move forward. And I think that's like what Socrates, maybe it was Sophocles or Socrates said, like a life that's not self-examined is not worth living.
Yeah, I think that's so many interesting things that you said there, that whole reinvent. I actually teach a self-esteem class called Reinvent because it is a process of reinventing. And thank you for saying that it's a process that's actually fun. I feel like I know for me, when I first got sober, I was like, there it is, it's over, no more fun for me. And nothing could have been further from the truth. Like I don't even know where that idea came from, that it was going to be this horrible, like the newcomer grind, it just sounded torturous and horrible.
Because you had brainwashed yourself.
I did. I didn't think I could possibly live without my favorite things.
Well, it's and maybe you can't live the life that you used to have without your favorite things, but you're not living that life anymore. You're living a different life with other new favorites.
Yeah, and truth be told, I feel like I was hanging on to a life I didn't even like. Yeah. I didn't even like it anyway. Right. But I just didn't know it, but the void, like the abyss of what could be was, I was blind to it. Like it was behind a curtain that I didn't have access to. And so I think it is important for us to talk about like how much fun sobriety is and how we can connect it, like how fulfilling and purposeful it can be. And I feel like we get that lesson.
Yeah, one thing I always say, and I say this to my kids too, it's like, you just don't know what you don't know.
Yeah.
And there is a whole universe of possibilities out there. And, drugs and alcohol, and these kinds of, behaviors and addictive behaviors blind us to those possibilities, because to do different things means that we're taking time away from them. And they don't
Yeah.
like that. They want to be first and foremost in our thought patterns. So once those are gone, it frees people up to find out things that they don't know, try things they've never tried before, and become people and individuals that they never thought possible. You
Yeah.
can't do that. You can't do that if you're completely closed off in the matrix of delusional self-doubt, procrastination, and all those other things that are endemic with people who are addicted to drugs and alcohol.
Right.
I call
Absolutely.
it the user matrix.
The what?
The user matrix.
Oh, the user may yeah, from yeah,
You're in the matrix, you need to get out
yeah,
of the matrix.
got to get out. And I want to talk about your workbook for a minute, because there's something really, I don't even know what the word is, but questions are a way sort of into, I feel like it's a way to sort of break through the delusion,
Mhm.
right? Through faulty logic, right? And I know you to be very logical. I really appreciate critical thinking skills. And some of the questions in the workbook I think about are really important. So I'm just looking at your workbook, and you mentioned issues to think about as you watch the film. So you pick a film, and then it's how feelings of low self-esteem cause an individual to abuse alcohol.
Mhm.
To what extent drinking causes depression, or people drink because they're depressed. I mean, the questions I find are so insightful. How did you come up with the questions for the workbook?
Well, thanks for that question. I just I use Chat GPT. No, I'm kidding. No, no.
Not a bad
Listen,
idea.
I've been going to AA meetings and smart recovery meetings for a very long time, and I've read a lot of books, and I also am familiar with motivational interviewing and other
Oh,
techniques,
so important.
and also like cognitive behavioral therapy and rational motive behavioral therapy, and a lot of those times, those kinds of technologies are based on asking penetrating questions of like, well, let's examine this. Let's take a step back and think about why we're thinking this. And so I sort of was very cautious about trying to ask questions that I thought would raise deeper issues of like, philosophically, what is going on with your addiction, but also what are you thinking right now? So when you see this scene in 28 days, have you ever had a situation where you were doing the same things as Sandra Bullock? Were you feeling the same things? Now, what was the outcome for you? For Sandra Bullock, she got better and etc. Was your outcome the same? Did you also, when you first started in rehab, did you also feel that you didn't belong there, that you were special, that somehow you weren't like those people? And if so, explain that. But also more importantly, explain how you realized that perhaps was not true and that you did belong there. And as a result, what was the beneficial outcome of that? And so, that sort of gives a very much more formulaic, structural, clinical way of using what happens in the movies from a motivational interviewing point of view and REBT to actually allow people to write down in the workbook and discuss those kinds of questions, which I think are very important for purposes of critical self reevaluation and towards getting towards people's recovery goals.
I think, and so you're doing this in a group setting, right? Through meetups. So people they watch the movie together. I want to know what the format is. So is it
Sure.
basically like they watch the movie together, they all have their workbooks, and they kind of go around in a circle and hear everybody else's thoughts about how they answer the questions?
Yeah, I mean, the format, I've made it very easy and very plug and play. So it's customizable depending on the amount of time and the amount of people and the setting. So for instance, if we're in some IOPs and PHPs, long-term residential, sober homes, recovery community organizations. So like in IOP and recovery community organizations, you have maybe the time in your schedule for like 2-hour meeting, 2-hour movie, and half an hour discussion, which is
Mm.
fine. So that's 3 hours. But maybe in PHP, you have time where you could do a 2-hour movie and then 2-hour discussions. That's totally up to each facilitator. And then sometimes people just want to watch a movie, think about it, and then come back and use the work and then fill out the workbook on their own time, and then discuss the questions afterwards, like almost like a movie club. Sometimes you don't have to watch the movies in groups. Sometimes you could say to people in your IOP programs, watch the movie on your own dime and your own time, and then come into this meeting prepared, almost like a book club, like have the book read, and then come in, we're going to talk about it. And so that is another way of doing it. And you could do the questions and answers in person. But if people are not ready to really sort of open up, then maybe they do that as a journaling exercise afterwards, and everybody shares in the subsequent meeting. So you do a recap of like, okay, last week we saw Days of Wine and Roses. Let's talk about that. Okay, so you talk about it for half an hour, and then like, great, I think that was wonderful. Well, let's watch another movie about alcohol and drug use and relationships, When a Man Loves a Woman. And then you guys can fill out your workbook questionnaires based on that for next week's opportunity. So it's very much up to the discretion
Oh,
of
I love that.
each person. Our biggest meeting is in Chicago. CBS News did a report about us, but I feel like 30, 40 people standing room only, and they watch a movie about addiction recovery. There's a little bit of a setup, and this is chaired by Bonnie Kimpling and Above and Beyond Recovery Center. They're just a fantastic group of people in a very difficult part of Chicago with a lot of trauma, racial divisions, etc. And they've been doing these movie meetups now for weeks, and standing room only. People are crying, coming out of these meetings, totally changed. And they spend like about 20 to 30 minutes afterwards, just going through, not the workbook per se, but just going through questions. They don't each have a copy of the workbook. And so they go through it and they discuss it, and it turns into, people who have not said one word in a recovery meeting for the last 6 weeks suddenly open up their mouths and say, I totally got it. When Nicolas Cage didn't want his girlfriend to help him, I totally understand that, and I changed as a result. That's just like, such a huge win for the program, really. And it happens all the time.
That's amazing. I mean, I could totally see it, like in my mind is spinning because, it's another way. This is like a more fun way. You watch, I could totally see this for like, I run some women's groups and stuff, like throw out a movie and then have the workbook, and then people can just come for the discussion piece. And I find that if you only need like one or two talkers, there's always one or two talkers in a group to kind of kick it off, and then everybody else starts feeling comfortable sharing, and then it just really turns into something that's super connecting and engaging and fun.
Yeah, and that's the thing about movies. Not only do people like to talk about movies from their point of view, they like to hear what other people have to say about movies. And effective recovery in group sessions has a magnification effect. It's sort of like a group effect of like, when you have a lot of people engaging and sharing in these meetings, that's what you want from mutual support meetings. And movies provide a very easy, comfortable platform and entry point and jumping off point for people to have discussion. So if you're in a typical like recovery meeting and somebody says, let's talk about, that time where you hit rock bottom and what that meant for you. Everyone's like, oh God, they don't want, all right. So,
Let's talk about surrender.
Yeah. So, okay, that's good. And you want people to do that work, and it's important, but is there an easier way to sort of edge into that conversation? Movies are that,
so much easier to talk about somebody else's problems.
Right. But really what you're doing is you're talking about your own. And that's why the book relates everything back to you. What did you think of this? Have you done that? Did you think that the way that Nicolas Cage ended up is something that could happen to you? And is that scary to you?
Yeah. I love this. Let's land this plane a little bit. Tell me how people, like, where do we get the book, and how do we learn about the meetups and the formats and all that?
Well, I think we've got a really cool website called recoverymoviemeetups.com. And so this program is something that I'm actively selling into treatment facilities, IOP residential, luxury rehab, Canadian rehabs, just basically like, and there's a lot of treatment facilities that are coming on board slowly to adopt this, which is terrific. And then we're also in recovery community organizations, which are these nonprofits that basically do a lot of the meat and potatoes work of recovery for free in communities around the world. They are really the unsung heroes of the addiction recovery space, because they don't charge anything and they take everyone, and they're a safe, comfortable place for people to talk. And they've really taken off. And for a lot of the recovery community organizations, I'm working on a way to give them free workbooks for life if they're nonprofits.
Wow.
And I'm also a nonprofit as well, so I get it. But then individually, there's an opportunity that that I really wanted to talk to you and your audience about, in the sense that, recovery movie meetups is a little bit like Smart Recovery in the sense, and you know that I did a lot of work for them. And that
Brilliant organization, by the way.
right, they're
Love
fantastic.
it. Love
I
it.
still host a weekly meeting, but I took the Smart Recovery training, and I host a Smart Recovery meeting tonight. I'm actually having a meeting at 7 p.m. I've got a wonderful community of people, but as easily as it is for me to set up a Zoom meeting or a face-to-face meeting on behalf of Smart Recovery, when people take our 2-hour online free training and then register with a recovery movie meetups, anybody, any individual can host a recovery movie meetup either online or in their living room or at a community center or anywhere that they like. So if they want to get a group of like cinema lovers like them or like-minded people in recovery, that you tell them, all right, let's watch Days of Wine and Roses, and then let's get together and talk about it using this workbook as a way to structure the conversation. Again, that's fantastic. So all you have to do is, once you register, you could, if you need to buy the workbooks, I sort of totally stress that you can get the most out of the program by actually getting a copy of the workbook. And if you buy them on wholesale on our website, it's like peanuts, really.
Right.
And once you have
Less than
that,
a drink.
it's totally less than, yeah,
Less than a
that's the
night
way
of
to look at it.
drinking.
Yeah, it's less than one beer at a bar. You can get, it's like happy hour prices. I mean,
Right, right.
boy, what a deal. So,
Right.
and if you have everybody sitting around with the workbook, filling out these things and then sharing their answers, it's tremendously powerful. And, in a sense, this book also becomes part of a person's recovery capital in a
Oh,
way.
yeah.
So like by filling this out, you're like, wow, that's why at the very beginning I put, this is your name and the date. And if you lose it, please return it too, because this becomes something valuable that you can reflect back on. It's not just like, a handout. It's actually part of your, you're putting your life into this in a sense, because if you answer all these questions very honestly, this is something that you could refer back to 5 years from now and say, wow, look how much I've grown, or like, what was I thinking back then? And,
Oh, that's such an important point. This whole idea of like social media in comparison to others is largely self-defeating. And we're taught in recovery to compare ourselves to our past self, like how far we've come. And
yeah,
using something, I could see how put it on your calendar like every 6 months, every year to go back and review. This is like your own personal historical document, to use a
right.
Galaxy Quest
Yeah, exactly. I love
references.
that film. And also,
Yeah.
rewatch the movies.
Rewatch the
That's
movies.
something
Yeah,
really,
see how it hits you different.
yeah. Because you're like, okay, I've gone through recovery. Now, when you watch 28 days, when you watch 28 days and you're just like, just got into rehab. And if you watch 28 days, 10 years after rehab, you see it in a completely different context. What started off as like a really tedious, like unfunny, I can't wait for this movie to be over experience, turns into a funny reflection on everything that you've been through and how much that was your story.
Isn't that like the tragedy plus time equals comedy?
Oh, yeah, remember, I think we talked about that.
Did we?
Yeah.
We laugh at the weirdest things at meetings and things. It's only us can we understand, like,
Yeah.
people will say things. I remember going to meetings at first and somebody would share something that on the surface sounded totally tragic and everybody's laughing. And I'm like, why is that funny? You don't know, you don't really get the joke until you kind of heal and evolve. And that kind of
Yeah.
speaks to how this process will allow us to evolve, right? And as we evolve and change, it's also full of quotes today. No man steps into the same river twice.
Yes.
I don't know if that's the right, you know what I mean?
No,
But
it's
yeah, we're always
true.
evolving. And so it would be interesting to rewatch these movies and compare our new thinking to our old thinking.
Yeah, especially if you see yourself reflected in somebody else and you're like, I was so totally that person. Oh my God. On one sense, it's like kind of embarrassing, but another sense is very fun because you're not that person anymore. So it's like, yay, I'm not Sandra Bullock.
And plus, I feel like it's an opportunity to practice compassion for the person that we used to be,
Yeah.
right? I feel like so much of recovery is affected when it's done through this lens of self-compassion. Like, you know what, all these, bad habits, let's say that we had, were really survival skills born
Mm.
out of a need of not knowing what else to do, right? Or not having the right support. And so once we get all the right support and we grow and move on, it's like, oh, that old me did what they had to do to survive. And there's like this empathy and compassion for who we used to be. And I think
Yeah.
it's easier to feel that for someone on the screen. But I
Mhm.
mean, who doesn't love Sandra Bullock, right? She's adorable. And you kind of feel like you really feel for the characters in the
Yeah.
movie.
And you know, a lot of, and that's such a great point, Arlena, because, you know, there's a lot of what recovery is. And I you know, in a very, this is a very general statement. I'm saying a lot of recovery can be seen as like very much blame-based, shame-based,
Yeah.
fear-based,
Yeah.
pain-based, you know, like there's a lot of people in the recovery world that think that you need to hit rock bottom. That's the only way you'll learn. You know, they
Yeah.
don't
It's
see
not
any middle
true.
ground. You need to go to prison, you know? And so we don't have time to debate those things. I think that the compassion thing is the most radical, self-forgiveness is the most important thing here. But, you
Mhm.
know, movies in a sense allow you to see an objective representation of somebody getting the shit kicked out of him or
Yeah.
her and
Mhm.
going to rock bottom. And you can see that without having to actually experience it yourself. You can see
Yeah.
somebody else being shamed beyond belief and losing everything, like Sandra Bullock in that horrible scene where she screws up her sister's wedding and like dives into the cake and etc. You don't have to feel that shame. You can see that shame, and that
Mhm.
affects you, and you get the message. So it's almost like a virtual reality where you get to experience all the things that could help you recover: fear, shame, pain, you know, retribution, etc., physical consequences, scare tactics. But you see it in the form of a comfortable movie where it's not your actual experience. And so that is, I think, one of the weird positive aspects. Not weird, but what are the cool positive?
It's
And
really,
somebody brought
yeah,
that to my
unique.
attention. Recovery movie meetups allows you to show things that you can't risk somebody feeling or experiencing in their recovery, because it'll be either too painful or too torturous, and they'll probably end up going back to their behaviors because they're so upset. And as you well know, a lot of people who go into recovery feel so much shame that the only way to overcome that feeling is through going back to the drug of choice. It's like, if I'm going to feel this bad, I might as well feel just as bad by drinking or
Right.
using, etc.
Right.
So again, that turns into, like, you know, the rat on the treadmill problem. But I think this is recovery movie meetups is a way to sort of like show those experiences without actually having to live those experiences, but getting the same lessons learned out of those experiences.
Yeah, there's that idea that empathy is the antidote to shame. And I think it's easier to feel empathy towards somebody else. There's also, pain recognizes pain. And I think that's why the movies are so powerful. And I love that idea of not having to hit rock bottom. You can recognize somebody else's pain without that same humiliation, hopefully.
Yep.
And, but recognize it and, follow the whole process through to the healing part and getting
Mhm.
better, as you said.
Yeah, and you know, in a lot of senses, there are a lot of people who get into recovery have not had catastrophic losses. No, thank gosh, right? Because
Yeah, yeah,
most,
yeah.
hopefully, you know, a lot of people have lost wife, family, DUI, whatever, lost millions of dollars, whatever it is. Maybe some people have lost everything,
Yeah.
but a large percentage of people have not quite lost everything yet.
But
So,
everybody's lost something.
but everybody's lost something. But you know, certain people have not lost. Like in my case, I thank God I still have my family, you know, my health, my job, my career, my
Yeah,
mind,
same.
more importantly. But and so you sort of like nipped it in it. You got to a fork in the road, and now you can like fix everything. You haven't
Mhm.
lost everything. But by seeing representations of people who have lost everything, like a lot of these movies show really bad rock bottoms. When you see those kinds of things on, it's sort of like vicarious learning. Like in a way, they're kind of lurid. That's why people like drunkalogs and AA meetings are like, wow, you know what? I would never go that low. But that's kind of a cool story of like, whoa, living in the gutter and homelessness and needles and all that stuff. You're like, kind of cool, interesting. That's why people love that movie, the TV show Intervention, right? Because they're like
Mm.
looking at those people at like just the worst rock bottom right before they get into
Yeah, it's a
recovery.
train wreck. Yeah.
It's a train. Everybody loves a good train. And I said this in the book, people love a good train wreck, but let the train wreck be happening not with you, but have it be happening in a movie that you're watching, so that you can learn from that and not repeat that, and
Oh,
have that be
leaving Las Vegas. That's a good one.
exactly. It's like,
Yeah.
I do not want to die in a hotel room,
Yeah.
in Las Vegas. That's the not a good look for me.
Yeah. I would have to say though, at the I can't stand a drunkalog at meetings. Certain meetings encourage people not to have a long one. But you're right. There is something, there's this morbid fascination with the train wreck, right? Like
Yeah,
we all watch,
right. But
but yeah,
the drunkalog has its utility.
it
If it's not,
does.
but the drunkalog's usefulness is the fact that somebody's telling a story, which goes back to my point previously, which is allows people to imagine and build mental models of what that actually is. So
Yeah.
somebody tells a story, they're imagining it in their brain. Everybody
Mhm.
is different, but movies take all of the guesswork out of it, and they go right to the representation. And there it is. And it's beautifully produced, and it has great messages to convey. And it's always going to be probably a better representation than what you could conjure up based on a drunkalog from somebody next to you who's probably not telling a very good story, or is telling you a story that's out of context. That's
You're
not
right.
really
Yeah.
helpful.
Yeah. I love me some professional storytellers. That's for sure. Well, Ted, this is really amazing. I love the work that you do. You just have such great ideas, and it sounds like this is taking on a life of its own, right? Because it really strikes to the heart of who we are as people, right? We all want to connect, really, and we all have those struggles. And who doesn't love a good comeback story? And so you've given us 100 movies in your original book, and now we have 20 movies to focus on, and a format with some questions
Mhm.
to facilitate really that self-examination that can be so hard sometimes. So I just want to thank you so much for all the work that you're doing. You're doing amazing work to help people heal, and it's always a pleasure to get to hang out with you.
Oh, I love being on your show. I'll be on your show every month. Anytime you call, I'll be ready.
Yay.
No, I just think, listen, you and I, we've both been there. We know how crappy it can be, but we also know how unbelievably awesome it can be afterwards. So
Yeah.
I just want to share that, that sort of that thought with people, that, it might look bleak right now, but man, tomorrow is another day, and you have nobody. And like what William Goldman said about movies, nobody knows anything. Everything is possible, but
Everything is possible.
you have to be sober. Basically, that's it. Sorry, pretty simple
Sorry.
calculus. Yeah,
Sorry, not sorry.
sorry, not sorry. So bad, too sad.
What's the best way of for people to get a hold of you if they want to learn more?
Oh, I'm an open book. I return emails like around the clock. So Ted at recoverymoviemeetups.com. And if you want to start a meeting, oh my God, please, I'll send you a free copy of the workbook. I'll get you registered. You'll be in our back end. Then you could buy all the books you want if you need to on wholesale. Tell me where you are. Also, on the website, we have a database that has all of the movies from the book, along with links for how to buy them on iTunes or
Oh, that's
Amazon,
really
or,
important, right?
or whether they're free on Netflix or HBO. So that way sometimes you don't have to spend money renting them, but it's super easy to rent or buy the movies. And then, if you want to do these meetings long-term, buy the movies. They're $10. Again, less than the cost of a drink. You have a movie that you can show in your meetings. And I think that our experience has shown that when you start these meetings and you want to build a community around recovery, but then using movies, you're going to have a lot of people that flock to these meetings, and they'll be very popular. And this will be a way for individuals using recovery movie meetups to expand their recovery community and really push that forward, not just the movies, but the message of hopefulness and recovery to others in their community. So I think it'll have a multiplier effect.
Couldn't agree more. I mean, the message of hope, that's it right there. Well, Ted, thank you so much. I'll look forward to our next conversation.
Oh, I can't wait. Thank you for your support, Alina. And and congratulations on all your accolades. You're on the list of top this, top that, top whatever.
Yeah, we're doing good. I have amazing
Yeah.
guests like you. So thank you so much.
You are basically the Huffington Post Ariana Huffington of recovery content. I think it's fantastic.
That's quite a compliment. Well, thank you so much. And we'll talk again real soon.
Thank you.